Throughout the life of the Division, there's been talk about whether or not weapons and gear should be separate for PvE and PvP. What are some of the pros and cons of making this change, and should it be implemented in the Division 2? That's next. Hey, it's DeadSockPuppet here with my latest Division video. If you're a returning viewer, welcome back, and if you're new, thank you for the view. Make sure to click the DSP logo below to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss out on new content. Also, let me know in the comments below if there's any topics that you'd like me to cover. Now let's jump into whether or not PvE and PvP should have separate gear and weapons. For starters, let's talk a little bit about some weapon and gear history that gives a little background into why PvE and PvP might need separate gear and weapons. First up is the FrontLine gear set. It was supposed to be released around update 1.3, but it was delayed because Massive felt it would be broken in PvP despite being viable in PvE. The FrontLine gear set was later released as D3 FNC or Defense gear set in update 1.5. Next is the B.L.I.N.D system MDR rifle. It was supposed to be released with the B.L.I.N.D gear set in update 1.3, but it was delayed because of balancing issues. The rifle was finally released in update 1.5 as the Urban MDR, following the B.L.I.N.D set being re-released as the Banshee gear set in update 1.4. Finally, a quick look at the S.E.E.K.R gear set. It was supposed to be released in update 1.6, but was cut from the game after only being tested in the PTS. The 4-piece talent of auto crit after 2 consecutive body shots would have been OP but playable in PvE. However, Massive and many in the community felt it would be beyond broken in PvP. Taking these examples into consideration, along with the constant attempts to try and tweak and balance weapons and gear sets, what are some of the pros and cons of separating weapons and gear? Let's look at the pros of having separate gear and weapons for PvE and PvP first. Balancing would not be needed, or most likely wouldn't be as difficult if gear and weapons didn't need to be balanced over both PvE and PvP. Massive could make weapons and gear that are OP in PvE and make players feel like gods while having separate and lesser powered items in PvP. With separate weapons and gear sets, Massive could create classes and have unlockable items such as weapons, gear, mods, and skills similar to what COD and Battlefield have for multiplayer. This could add replayability and extend the grind, as players could collect weapons and gear for PvE content and then log into PvP content and level up or prestige and unlock weapons, gear, mods, and skills. Separation like this could allow for more traditional PvP modes like COD, Battlefield, and Destiny offer. Combination could also extend the game's player base by bringing in more traditional PvP players that are looking for multiplayer more in line with other shooters. Also, a playlist could be added to the PvP to allow unnormalized combat similar to Iron Banner and Destiny, which could allow players to use their PvE gear in PvP. Now that we've looked at the pros, what are some reasons not to separate weapons and gear for PvE and PvP? First and foremost, this is not what the Division is. Players are able to grind PvE and PvP and then use loot they earn in either kind of play. They're also able to take their builds and go toe-to-toe in either normalized or unnormalized PvP combat if they choose. Next, Massive would have to manage 2 separate sets of weapon and gear sets, causing double maintenance work and potentially reducing quality of life fixes and other updates that have been able to benefit both PvE and PvP in the past. Big drawback would be that players wouldn't be able to test their builds against each other in PvP combat. The fun of the DZ PvP is that players can clash and see who's a more skilled player and with a better build, and this wouldn't be possible if a split system was built. Finally, casuals and players that don't have a lot of time to play would most likely have to focus on either PvE or PvP, as they probably wouldn't have time to grind both adequately for their character. Because of this, some players would either miss out on half of the game or wouldn't have as good of an experience due to being undergeared. So all this is fine and good, and there's good arguments for and against separating weapons and gear between PvE and PvP. However, it doesn't address the elephant in the room, the DZ. If the DZ remains true to Division 1 form, it will be a combination of PvE and PvP environment in the Division 2. Because of this, how would the DZ be handled if there are separate PvE and PvP weapons and gear? Would it fall under PvE rules or PvP rules? If the DZ falls under PvE rules, PvP players might neglect other PvP modes, especially if there isn't an unnormalized PvP playlist or mode, because it would be the best place to test themselves against other players. As a result, there could be as much as, if not more, griefing in the DZ as PvP players and PvE players clash. If the DZ falls under PvP rules, it could lose its uniqueness that it currently has in Division 1. Something else to remember, loot would most likely only carry over to PvE or PvP, depending on which rule set it falls under. As a result, PvE only players may avoid PvP DZ and vice versa, because time spent there wouldn't reward them with usable loot. Ultimately, I think the PvE and PvP should have separate weapons and gear, but the DZ should fall under the PvE rules. I think that Massive should utilize a system similar to what other shooters use for PvP, with classes and unlockable weapons, gear, mods, and skills. There should be a playlist or setting that allows players to play PvP modes in an unnormalized way, so that there could be an opportunity to test build skills and gameplay skills together. Loot that is acquired in the PvP only environment should only be usable in PvP. And while I'm primarily a PvE player, I think that having the DZ stay a place where there is PvE and unnormalized PvP like it currently is would be the best option. I'm not someone that goes into the DZ to PvP, but the risk of being attacked by rogues is what makes the DZ what it is and shouldn't be changed. So thanks again for watching. What do you think? Should gear and weapons be separate for PvE and PvP? Do you agree with my thoughts? Let me know in the comments below. Finally, if you haven't already, click the DSP logo below to subscribe and ring the bell to get notifications on when I post new content. And remember to comment below if there's a topic you'd like me to cover.